Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name's Mark, and I'm going to be your host this week. And as always, I'm joined by Joe, an old friend from college. And together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. Joe, as I'm sure you're aware, the World Cup is about to get started in that well-known soccer mecca known as Qatar.
Right.
The United States has its first game on Monday, I understand, against Wales. And I'm curious. Earlier in my life, a few decades ago, I would have been fairly confident that the trajectory of the American national team would be such that America would challenge for a World Cup title within my lifetime. I'm now starting to have second thoughts about that because it's not advancing as quickly as I thought. What do you think? Are we going to see American champions on the World Cup pitch before we're dead? Or is this just going to be the world's game, but not America's game?
Boy, that's a good question. You know, it seems inevitable that a country with enough people and economic might as this one would eventually be able to field a competent World Cup challenger. But I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just happy that when we have a competitive team that is in every game and has a chance to make the next round, which I think is going to be the case with this young American squad.
Yeah.
And before we get off the World Cup, I just want to mention that on NPR today, I heard that hundreds of people died constructing all the facilities for the World Cup because of the intense heat. So yeah. I have a feeling this is going to be a very controversial World Cup.
Yes. And part of that controversy is a lot of the people who died were reportedly slave laborers who had been brought in on work visas and promised salaries and then not paid and not allowed to leave the country until the project was complete. So a lot of questions need to be answered in that scenario.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, let's just enjoy some soccer.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump into this week's topic because it's a big one with a lot of meat on the bone. And it's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Recently, Mark Zuckerberg changed the name of his company from Facebook to Meta, and that was to signal an all-in commitment to building the Metaverse, which is the term that's become common parlance since a 1992 novel called Snow Crash, which talked about the Metaverse as this virtual reality, essentially successor to the internet, in which people would go in and they'd play games or they'd meet and they'd listen to music. Like anything you can do in the real world, you can do better in the Metaverse was basically the premise. And various companies over the years have attempted to build something like that. For instance, there was a company called Second Life that built a very unconvincing Metaverse. But Zuckerberg has decided that the Metaverse is the future of social media. And so he has committed his entire company to building that thing, damn the cost. And partly as a consequence of that, recently, Meta stock price just tumbled because Zuckerberg spent so much money on the Metaverse project at the same time as Facebook or Meta's advertising arm wasn't doing so well that Wall Street was unimpressed. And so some people are asking the question, is this obsession that Zuckerberg has with the Metaverse going to be the thing that finally sinks his company once and for all? So I sent you on this task, Joe, to look into the Metaverse and come back with your estimation of how far away is this thing? Is it a pie-in-the-sky scenario, or is this something that we will all be experiencing as pervasively as we experience social media today?
Yeah, well, boy, you're right about one thing. This is a meaty topic, and I'm going to blather on for quite a while about it, so buckle in.
Yeah, maybe now's the time to go get some snacks.
Yes.
We'll wait until you come back.
Okay. But, it's funny how you sometimes ask me questions like this one about the future of cutting-edge technologies, since I'm such a Luddite when it comes to tech. I didn't get my first mobile phone until last year, and only because the New York Yankees went paperless and I couldn't get into Yankee Stadium without a phone. I kind of feel like my story would make a good Black Mirror episode. Guy without smartphone gradually ceases to exist because the rest of humanity communicates only by smartphone.
That would actually be a good episode. Maybe I'll write that up on a spec script.
Yeah. For those in our audience who Rip Van Winkled away the last 20 years, let's start with some facts and figures about the company at the heart of today's episode. Facebook is the wildly popular online social media and networking platform that was founded in 2004 by Mark Zuckerberg and a handful of his nerdy friends at Harvard. It's now one of the most popular and profitable businesses in the world, with 2.93 million active monthly users. Notwithstanding my Luddite credentials, I'm one of them. I hardly ever post anything. I just read and occasionally respond to posts made by my family and friends. I have a second Facebook footprint with you, Mark, as we maintain our Mansplaining the Podcast Facebook page.
Yes.
I assume you're also on Facebook.
I am on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook the way I used to be. I would say that at one point I was a fairly active user of Facebook, but now I'm more like you, just sort of passively seeing what shows up in my feed and occasionally interacting with it.
Right. Facebook is the most downloaded mobile app of the last decade and the third most visited website in the world. Mark, you want to guess the other 4 most visited websites in the world?
Man, this is going to be a tough one. I'm going to say Google is probably one of those.
Google is number 1.
Okay. Then there's a Chinese everything service that's like their Google and Uber and Amazon rolled up into one. I think it's called Weibo.
They're not in the top 5, and I'm scanning the top 50 to see if I can find them, and I'm not immediately finding them.
Maybe because they're an app rather than a website.
Yeah.
Let me guess, is Amazon one of the top 5?
Amazon is not in the top 5. It's number 13.
Okay. YouTube.
YouTube is number 2.
Well, Instagram isn't a website. It's an app, so that's off.
Actually, Instagram.com is number 5.
Okay. ESPN.
No. Think Elon Musk.
Oh, Twitter.
Twitter, number 4. Yep.
And dropping like a stone.
Yes, right. And before we leave this, I just want to say I did not see Mansplaining the Podcast on that list. And let's be frank, that's our listeners' fault.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head in disappointment over here. But, it is what it is. We give, and we give. And
they take, they don't give back. Yeah. All right, moving on. Meta Platforms, Inc., or Meta for short, is the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. It's one of the big 5 American IT companies, along with Alphabet, formerly known as Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. Meta is one of only 6 companies in world history to have had a market capitalization of $1 trillion, which it achieved in June 2021, but which has fallen off sharply since then for reasons I'll explain shortly. In October 2021, Facebook changed its corporate name to Meta to signal that building and populating the metaverse would be its focus going forward. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but there's one other detail about Facebook and Meta that's relevant to your question. Meta's business is basically separated into 2 buckets: the so-called family of apps like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger, its core business that in 2021 derived 97.5% of its revenue from ad sales, and the ironically named Reality Labs, since almost none of it is real yet, which, according to CNBC, is, quote, responsible for developing the virtual reality and related augmented reality technology that underpins the yet-to-be-built metaverse, end quote. Just ahead of its name change, Facebook announced that Reality Labs would start reporting its revenue separately from the family of apps. Now, you mentioned in your question that all was not well at Meta these days. Its stock price plummeted by more than 70% this year, and it lost about $700 billion in market value in just the past several weeks. Mm-hmm. In the 2 weeks since you asked me this question, Mark, Meta announced a huge layoff of more than 11,000 employees, 13% of its total workforce.
Yeah.
Meta also instituted a hiring freeze through at least the first quarter of 2023.
Yeah, that's had an impact on my neighborhood because there's a Facebook office that's about 3 blocks from where I live. And so there are possibly people in my apartment building who were affected by that situation.
Yeah, it's a significant layoff. In a blog post to employees, CEO Mark Zuckerberg blamed himself for being overly bullish about the surge of e-commerce after the COVID-19 pandemic shut down much of the brick-and-mortar economy in 2020. Facebook had actually doubled its staff to more than 87,000 in the prior 3 years. Mm-hmm. That surge turned out to be temporary, and so, in addition to the staffing cuts, management also trimmed budgets and perks and shrank its real estate footprint by, quote, transitioning to desk sharing for people who already spend most of their time outside the office, end quote. Even so, Zuckerberg declared that the company would continue its significant investments in, quote, our AI discovery engine and our long-term vision for the metaverse. We're leading in developing the technology to define the future of social connection, end quote. Despite that optimistic gloss on the future, and notwithstanding a 4% bump in its stock price immediately after the layoff announcement, the fact remains that Meta's layoffs were its first broad job cuts since the founding of the company. It's true that other tech firms have had to cut staff recently, most notably Twitter under its new owner Elon Musk. But Zuckerberg's explanation about the ebb and flow of e-commerce is just one factor explaining Meta's recent problems. The steep rise of a competitor in the social media space, TikTok, has taken a bite into Facebook's wildly profitable ad business, as have recent changes to Apple's iOS privacy policy that require third-party apps like Facebook to ask permission to track iPhone and iPad users' data in order to target them with ads. And then there's the elephant in the virtual room, Meta's huge investment in the metaverse. It's not the family of apps that's hemorrhaging money. It's the Reality Labs unit that's reported to have lost $9.4 billion so far this year.
Yeah.
In a call with analysts last month to discuss Meta's third quarter earnings report, Zuckerberg faced lots of tough questions about his company's rising costs and expenses and its faltering revenue and profits. He admitted that part of Meta's rationale for developing the metaverse is to make sure it owns a computing platform that won't be adversely affected by future decisions of rivals like Apple.
Yeah, that's been Facebook's problem for so long, which is that they own the platform, but they don't own what the platform runs on. So they're dependent on companies like Apple and Google with its Android operating system to expose their platform to customers in a way that gives Facebook back what they need to sell to advertisers. So like you say, they're building this new universe so that they can own the whole thing soup to nuts and not have to negotiate that with the other companies.
Right. In Zuckerberg's view, tech companies like Meta are better positioned to be innovative when they build and own the stack of software and hardware that undergirds the platform. Mm-hmm. Asked why he believes that experimental bets like the metaverse will pay off, Zuckerberg replied, quote, I just think that there's a difference between something being experimental and not knowing how good it's going to end up being. Obviously, the metaverse is a longer-term set of efforts that is going to end up working and will provide greater returns over time, end quote. Which brings us to, what is the metaverse? Wikipedia offers two definitions. Quote, in futurism and science fiction, the metaverse is a hypothetical iteration of the internet as a single, universal, and immersive virtual world that is facilitated by the use of virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, AR, headsets. In colloquial use, a metaverse is a network of 3D virtual worlds focused on social connection, end quote. CNBC's technology correspondent Sam Sheed defined the metaverse as, quote, a virtual world where we can live, work, travel, and play. But it doesn't actually exist yet, and it may take a while to complete, end quote.
Yeah.
As you mentioned in your question, Mark, the coinage of the term comes from Neil Stephenson's 1992 sci-fi novel Snow Crash, and its depiction of human beings as programmable avatars interacting in a 3D virtual space, a computer-generated universe that resembles the real world.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't read the book, but from what I gleaned about it online, Stevenson's vision was prescient in many respects. Users access his metaverse from personal computer terminals by wearing goggles projecting a high-quality VR display. They create customizable avatars, and they use electronic currency. I think it's notable that in the book, Stevenson's metaverse becomes so popular that some users wear their computers on their bodies so they can stay permanently connected to it. He gives these people the name gargoyles because they look stupid and grotesque.
Yes. Yeah. I read the book, but quite a while ago, but it made a lasting impression on me.
I bet it did.
It's the work of science fiction that I probably just comes to mind more often than any other that I can think of.
Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't know anything about it before you put the question to me, but it sure sounds like a compelling book and very prescient.
Yes.
Since Snow Crash, we've seen the development of incipient metaverses via the massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG. I don't know if you're supposed to say that acronym, MMORPG.
I have heard it pronounced. It's usually just condensed to MMO for convenience purposes.
Okay, well, that's what I'll call it going forward. What it is a hybrid of a massively multiplayer online game and a role-playing video game. Popular games like Minecraft, Fortnite, and World of Warcraft are commonly described as part of the metaverse, as is the online game creation platform Roblox, where users can program their own games and play games created by others.
Yes.
A lot of people think the first metaverse was created in the multimedia platform Second Life, which you reference in your question. Second Life launched in June 2003. The Wikipedia page for Second Life describes it as a way to, quote, explore the world, known as the grid, meet other residents, socialize, participate in both individual and group activities, build, create, shop, and trade virtual property and services with one another, end quote.
I interviewed for a job at Second Life, as a matter of fact.
Oh, did you?
Yes. At the time, they were looking for basically a newspaper reporter to report on the goings-on inside the grid, and I interviewed for that job. I did not get it, but that was my brush with the metaverse.
Interesting. We can't call Second Life an MMO because its designer, Linden Lab, insists that it's not a game at all.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, there is no manufactured conflict, no set objective, end quote. The creator of Second Life, Philip Rosedale, defined the metaverse as a three-dimensional internet populated with live people, and his creation sorta qualifies. I remember checking out Second Life years ago, creating an avatar for myself and jumping in a few times, but I quickly grew bored with it and stopped.
Yeah.
And I seem not to be the only one who felt this way, as it had about 1 million regular users in 2013, but that number has trailed off significantly ever since.
Yeah. Well, my actual job interview was in Second Life. Like, we were supposed to have the interview in Second Life, but my computer was not up to spec. And so I kept crashing, and we ended up having the interview on the phone. So that's often the story with these online environments, is that in theory, it's this amazing experience. But if you don't have the hardware to make the most of it, then it's frustrating and jittery and unstable.
Yes. Yeah. Andreas Kaplan, a professor of marketing at the ESCP Business School in France, analyzed Second Life users in 2010, concluding that they saw it as not just a game, but as an extension of their real lives. I quote Kaplan, "Often, Second Life was described by its users as being more attractive than their actual first lives." End quote. The average user spent approximately 4 hours per day in Second Life, but, quote, "some of them spent more than 16 hours daily in this virtual environment using their real lives only to get some sleep." End quote.
Wow.
Were these the first real-life gargoyles?
It seems like they certainly wanted to be.
Yeah. Copious amounts of capital and sweat equity have already been directed toward designing the metaverse. Large companies like Gucci, HSBC, and Coca-Cola have already dabbled in it, and Google has made major investments in it, as have venture capitalists. None have been more zealously committed to its development than Meta, which is making a huge bet that millions of people will someday work, socialize, shop, and even exercise as digital avatars, with its metaverse as the integrated environment linking all its products and services, not to mention a way for Meta to make gobs of money.
Yeah.
One report estimates that the metaverse economy could be worth as much as $8 to $13 trillion by 2030.
Wow.
That's a staggering number.
Yeah. Yeah.
One way to think about the metaverse is as the next phase of the internet, a souped-up version of the digital world we already have. Whenever we use smartphones, play computer games, or surf the web, we're engaging with a crude V1 prototype of the metaverse. The investments made by Meta and others are meant to flesh out the existing primitive platform to make it more accessible and immersive, as well as safer and better for humanity. At least, that's the view of metaverse evangelists like Meta's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg,
Sure.
whose vision of the metaverse was described by one industry observer as, quote, "almost like an arcade game that you insert yourself into," end quote.
Yeah.
The man himself describes it as, quote, "an embodied internet where you're in the experience, not just looking at it," end quote. He uses words like amazing and joyful to describe the sensations users will experience in the metaverse. In our sources for this episode on our Facebook page, I'm going to post a link to his official announcement for the metaverse posted in October 2021. It's an almost feature film length video in which he lays out his utopian vision in technicolor detail. At the time, it received heaps of ridicule and launched 1,000 snarky memes. But if you have 77 minutes to kill and aren't too repelled by all the cheesy avatars, take a look and judge for yourself. If not, here's my executive summary with quotes from Zuckerberg to highlight some of the main themes. The fundamental building blocks of the metaverse include the feeling of presence. Quote, "You're going to really feel like you're there with other people," end quote. The use of photorealistic and stylized avatars to represent ourselves. Quote, "living 3D representations of you," end quote. A home space you can use, quote, "to invite people over, play games, and hang out," end quote, and from which you can teleport to and from other spaces whenever you want. And crucially, interoperability, so that whatever items you make or buy in the metaverse, quote, "will be useful in a lot of contexts. You're not going to be locked into one world or platform. You own your items, not a platform," end quote.
Yeah.
You'll be able to bring digital materials and services from the real world with you into the metaverse, and you can rest assured that, quote, "privacy and safety will be built into the metaverse from day one," end quote.
Yeah, and we're going to trust the leader of Facebook to be a bastion of privacy.
I'll say more about that shortly. Yeah, exactly.
A quick question. Have you had a virtual reality experience?
Never. No, never wore the headset. How about you?
Yes. On one very memorable occasion, I went into a T-Mobile store and was given a demonstration of the Oculus Rift. And I will say that the feeling of presence is astonishing. There were two scenarios that I remember. One, you're standing on the edge of a precipice at the top of a building looking at the street that like 100 floors below you, and you feel actual, like, oh my God, I'm going to fall
Vertigo.
off the edge.
Yeah.
Vertigo, yes. And then the second is you're in an office hallway and you hear this boom, 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 and a Tyrannosaurus Rex comes around the corner at the other end, sees you, roars, and comes charging at you. And my fear response was 100% real. I stepped backwards to avoid being eaten by this imaginary T-Rex.
Right.
So VR does have incredibly powerful ability to insert you into a situation and make you feel as if you're actually there. So that part, yeah, I agree with Zuck that VR does provide that in a way that the internet really cannot.
Yeah.
Of course, the devil's in the details in terms of providing that scenario where it's not just like two canned scenarios where you're on the building or you're in the office building, but where you can be anywhere. And that's a very challenging technical scenario, which I'm sure you have more to say on later.
Yeah.
But the feeling of presence is powerful. And I think that's the primary reason why people get VR headsets is because it is such an immersive experience.
Yeah, and all I'll add to what you said is that Oculus is now on to an even better headset that they call Quest. So if anything, the experience has gotten even more realistic than when you wore it.
Right. I don't need a more realistic T-Rex.
Right.
The one I saw was fine.
Plenty real, yeah. So Zuckerberg freely and repeatedly admits that the metaverse is a ways off. But he adds that, quote, in the next 5 or 10 years, a lot of this is going to be mainstream, end quote. He introduces us to Horizon, the social platform Meta is building to enable people to interact in the metaverse, consisting thus far of Horizon Home, Horizon Worlds, and Horizon Workrooms. He describes the progress being made so that creators can make use of the reactive 3D objects they develop. Of course, there will also be a Horizon marketplace where creators can sell or share their items, since it's vital to create an ecosystem to sustain the many creators building out the metaverse so they can, quote, make a good living doing this work, end quote. He cites gaming as a part of the metaverse that's closest to fruition and where lots of money has already been made. He invites Meta colleagues to give detailed explanations of how the metaverse is uniquely positioned to revolutionize the worlds of work, education, and commerce. Other Meta employees talk about recent technological advances in VR and AR software and hardware, as well as their commitment to safety, privacy, diversity, and openness. He talks about supporting a sustainable but, quote, massively bigger creative economy, end quote, in which countless new builders and developers of both physical and digital products sell them in the metaverse. He pledges to keep Meta's fees low wherever possible, while also acknowledging its plans to subsidize this massive build-out by investing many billions of dollars for years before the metaverse will be profitable. The dialogue in this video is stilted, and the acting is horrible. Quentin Tarantino, it's not. But if you can get past all that, it's an inspiring, uplifting vision of what Zuckerberg calls the next frontier for social connection. He laments how, even today, quote, our devices are designed around apps, not people, end quote, and concludes that, quote, this is not the way we were meant to use technology, end quote. His last words in the video are, the future is going to be beyond anything we can imagine. Is that a realistic vision of the future? There's no question that Meta and its competitors are racing to colonize the metaverse. For example, tech companies are investing billions of dollars in building or acquiring the hardware that they hope will serve as the gateway to one or more metaverses. In 2014, Facebook bought the virtual reality company Oculus, we were just talking about, whose latest VR headset, named Quest 2, has sold nearly 15 million units as it competes with other headsets, like HTC's Vive Pro 2 and Microsoft's HoloLens 2. In 2019, Facebook purchased CTRL Labs, which developed a wristband that can transmit electrical signals from the brain to a computer. Soon after Facebook became Meta, Microsoft staked its claim with a $70 billion acquisition of the social gaming company Activision Blizzard. And Apple is reportedly developing its own VR headset. All these behemoths would not be investing in this space if they didn't smell massive profit.
Yeah.
The COVID pandemic led to a speeding up of an already nascent trend toward the more seamless blending of home and the office. And that phenomenon might make people more open to metaverse-like experiences. Lauren Jackson, writing in the New York Times, acknowledged that trend while outlining the problems facing the metaverse's would-be designers. She wrote, quote, "While much of our lives have already shifted online during the pandemic, making those experiences truly immersive at scale is a knotty challenge. The metaverse is currently stalled by a lack of infrastructure. The hardware and software aren't ready yet. A monopolistic approach to platform development. The metaverse is likely to require more openness and collaboration, and a lack of clear governance standards," end quote. All these dangers are sure to get government regulators interested in the technology's progress if they aren't already.
Yeah.
Quote, "Now is the moment for the public to focus on another speculative prospect, what standards they might want to govern the next digital transition," end quote.
As you were talking through that, I was reminded that there's been a lot of scuttlebutt in the work arena recently, that one of the things that one of the effects that the pandemic had is it drove so much work to work from home, or to hybrid scenarios where some people are in the office and some people are not. And some people have suggested that a solution to that might bring back some of the features of the office without having people in the same room, is to have them all work in a virtual environment. And of course, the flip side of that is that the VR headsets that companies like Meta are producing right now are far too bulky to even imagine wearing them for 8 hours at a time. Like even after 2 hours, apparently they get kind of uncomfortable.
Right.
And so there's kind of this tension between the scenario that people are posing and the products that they're actually coming to market, where maybe we are just going to need to wait for 20 years for something that currently weighs 2 pounds to weigh 2 ounces before any of this is going to be real.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. Much like microchips or transistors have become infinitesimal, over time, you would think that the VR headset, the AR glasses are going to also become light and not an encumbrance. So
one thing I do wear throughout the workday, so for 8 hours at a time, is reading glasses. So give me a pair of reading glasses that provides a virtual reality experience, and I'm there. Like I would be more than happy to check into those virtual rooms and see what I can do there.
Yeah.
But ask me to wear a helmet for 8 hours, and I'm probably only going to do it for meetings, and then it's not really immersive.
Yeah, there are people working on the reading glasses. Part of the Zuckerberg's long video is partnership with Ray-Ban, where they're designing really sleek and cool-looking glasses to wear that will have some kind of VR component in them.
Yeah.
Or AR component.
And you mentioned Apple. It's one of the companies that are working on that. I've heard that they're working more on augmented reality rather than virtual reality. And for the listeners who don't understand the difference, augmented reality is you look through the glasses and you see your actual environment, but there are overlays upon that.
Right.
So there might be a little creature sitting on your desk waving at you, or it might provide additional information about what you're looking at.
Right.
I understand that designers are using AR to design 3D spaces where instead of working on a screen, they use the glasses to see it in actual 3D.
Right.
Whereas virtual reality presents a completely constructed environment. So you see no feature of your world, which I understand it's actually kind of a challenge, because if you've got a VR headset on and you've got a cup of coffee on your desk, you cannot see where your coffee is through your VR glasses, because the cup of coffee is not in your virtual world. But Apple has reportedly been working on AR glasses for quite a while. And if there's one thing you can count on from Apple, it's that they will not release anything that's bulky or heavy. So if there's any company that's going to come up with sleek glasses, it's probably that one.
Yeah, surely. Just on the AR, augmented reality, the thing that made it most understandable for me is like Pokemon Go, the craze Pokemon Go. That's basically augmented reality.
Yes.
You know, seeing the Pokemon while you're walking around on the street or in the park. There are some more cynical metaverse watchers out there who worry about things like user privacy, addiction, child safety, and the propensity for scams that already plague our online lives today.
Right.
It seems to me that the metaverse is also particularly vulnerable to infection by the virus of polarization that is ravaging the body politic right now. Platforms could easily end up as political or social echo chambers or otherwise alienating digital spaces that do little more than replay the partisan battles of the real world. Mm-hmm. As the two political tribes retreat further into their information bubbles, metaverses that cater to just us and leave out them might find receptive audiences.
Sure.
After all, conservatives already have their alternative fact-denying fakeaverse, a largely online creation where guns keep us safe, Democrats are blood-sucking pedophiles, and Donald Trump won the 2020 election. The Guardian's video game editor, Keza McDonald, criticized the naivete of tech companies like Meta that envision the metaverse as a safe space from prejudice, discrimination, and the exploitation of workers, adding that the rest of us might be more sanguine about its development were it not being overseen by, quote, companies and disaster capitalists trying to figure out a way to make more money, end quote. Mm-hmm. Andreas Kaplan, the academic who studied Second Life users, argued that a slicker, more technologically sophisticated metaverse could have a net negative societal impact by addicting its user population even more profoundly than Second Life users became hooked by its relatively primitive technology. Mm-hmm. The state of the real world may also factor into whether people escape to the metaverse. Hopefully, we won't see the dystopian Ready Player One scenario where climate change messes up the real world so badly that by 2045, large numbers of people put on headsets and gloves and retreat into an oasis-like VR landscape like the one depicted in that novel and film.
Yeah, where you escape into VR because your actual world is just so abhorrent and intolerable.
Yes.
And so you live the imaginary world because reality just is too much to face.
Yeah, so all bets are off if that happens, obviously. But I'm going to forge on and make my prediction at the end based on that scenario not happening.
Okay.
Here's something else to think about, Mark. It's possible that restricting the debate to metaverse evangelists and naysayers is not doing justice to what's really going on. In the vast middle between the two extremes, life in the metaverse is already kind of happening. Anyone who's played Minecraft or any of the umpteen dozen other computer or web-based video games of that ilk already knows what it's like to enter a virtual world where you can interact with other players.
Sure.
In one desktop game called Decentraland, players build the environment of the game and buy and sell things like land and wearables for their avatars.
Yeah. I understand the same is true in Roblox, which was originally set up as kind of a Minecraft-y environment for kids' games.
Yes.
But has developed in more of a metaverse direction with exactly what you described.
Yes.
Environments you can create, custom elements that you can build and sell to other users and that sort of thing.
Right. And importantly, whatever you build, I can then explore and play in Roblox, which makes it kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Companies are building things like interactive sports games where you feel like you're in the middle of the action, or apps that take artist renderings to a new level by, say, simulating what it's like to be inside a building that hasn't yet been built. Mm-hmm. This is the metaverse too, and it's neither the greatest thing since sliced bread nor the downfall of civilization. It's just some cool new things we're already doing or might be able to do soon.
Yeah, sports and rock concerts apparently are on the cusp of being offered through virtual reality, where If you can't get an actual Taylor Swift ticket, then you could experience the concert in VR, where you've got great seats. They're just not actual seats.
Yeah, I think we're there with the concerts already. It just hasn't been scaled up yet. The sports games are coming, but imagine being in the middle of the line of scrimmage for a pro football game. I mean, that's the kind of thing we could be seeing soon.
Right.
As the hardware becomes more affordable and VR technology finds its way into more and more homes, Metaverse evangelists see it becoming an essential part of people's lives, much like the smartphone, which is to say, technology that is inextricably connected to millions of people from the moment they open their eyes in the morning until they close them again at bedtime. But will that really happen? Some industry experts doubt the metaverse will take hold to that extent. Ben Wood, an analyst with the technology consultants CCS Insight, told CNBC, quote, "I remain to be convinced that I'm going to be putting on a headset at the beginning of the day and sitting in the metaverse all day. It'll be something that you'll perhaps snack on, use for certain applications, use at certain points when it's appropriate," end quote.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about TikTok, which you referenced earlier in this presentation as the thing that's put the fear of God into Mark Zuckerberg because it's the fastest growing social media network, particularly among kids, among younger users. And the entire user scenario for TikTok, what is built around, is extremely short interactions. A TikTok video cannot be longer than a single minute. And so your experience is just quick hit, and you come in and you leave whenever you want.
Yeah.
And contrast that with a VR experience where you got to wear the headset, it's got to be plugged in, you got to be online.
Right.
You got to be in an environment where if you're like flailing around, you're not going to hit anybody or break anything.
Yeah.
It's a much greater investment, both in terms of time and energy and equipment. And that's not the same scenario. That's not going to replace the TikTok impulse. That's going to replace maybe sitting down to watch Netflix. Like that's probably what, at least in the short term, a metaverse would compete with.
Yes. Boy, you're clairvoyant, Mark, because I'm going exactly to there in the next thing I want to say. On the question of whether the metaverse is going to become ubiquitous, I think the better answer is that it's too early to tell. Mm-hmm. Studies indicate that the average adult in the U.S. and the U.K. already spends more than 12 hours per day on screens. And one poll by the eye care company Vision Direct estimates that at current levels of technological consumption, the average American adult will spend the equivalent of, get this, Mark, 44 years of his or her life staring at a screen.
Yeah.
Now, with the COVID pandemic only accelerating the digitization of work, schooling, and socializing, I think it's not a matter of the metaverse being too much tech for us to consume. It's more a matter of whether preferences will change such that you'd rather hang out in the metaverse than watch your favorite news program or ball game on TV, which is what you just said a minute ago. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you'll watch that ball game or listen to that episode of Mansplaining, hint, hint, in the metaverse. That's another possibility.
Where you can enjoy the sexy avatars of Joe and Mark, your hosts.
Let's not overpromise.
I don't know about you, but my avatar is going to have glistening pectoral muscles.
So I am really sorry to say that we don't have any Patreon supporters of Mansplaining yet. So there's no expense budget for me to plunk down $399 for a Quest 2 headset so I can sample today's metaverse for myself. You'll just have to be satisfied with my report about other people's journeys into the metaverse. One such journey was documented in the New York Times by its privacy reporter, Kashmir Hill, who immersed herself in Horizon Worlds, one corner of Meta's metaverse that already has more than 300,000 users. Over the course of a few months, Hill spent dozens of hours as a legless, floating avatar of herself, visiting at all hours of the day so she could report on, as she put it, quote, who was currently there and why, and whether the rest of us would ever want to join them, end quote. Here are some of her more interesting observations. She described one big tribe of people using the platform as, quote, parents who had once enjoyed going out but were now stuck at home with young kids, end quote. Though there were also lots of kids there using their parents' headsets, even though the Horizon app was for ages 18 and over.
Right.
Despite crowdsourced efforts to police bad behavior, Horizon is also full of trolls, some of whom post videos of their exploits to YouTube. I'll post one example to our Facebook page if you're interested. She wrote that many of her most interesting conversations took place late at night with, quote, artists and technologists from across a wide sweep of time zones, end quote. It's easy to lose track of time in the metaverse because, as in casinos, there are no windows or clocks on the wall. One of the places she visited was a comedy club started by an amateur comedian, which gets 13,000 visitors every week, enough that Meta allows the proprietor to monetize his club by accepting donations for VIP access to a private lounge. He's done well enough that it's now his full-time job. Think about that. He works in the metaverse. There are other wannabe entrepreneurs there too, building worlds and selling products to world builders, all hoping to cash in eventually. At least one portion of Zuckerberg's dream is becoming reality. Acknowledging that these are the very early days of the metaverse, Kashmir Hill wrote that trying to explain it using Horizon Worlds alone, quote, feels akin to unpacking the potential of the web by surfing AOL chat rooms in the 1990s during the days of dial-up modems, end quote. Overall, she reported that parts of the experience were fun, like one particular game she played repeatedly that almost qualified as exercise, and which she planned to revisit even after filing her story. She also liked the idea of attending real-world events in the metaverse, like a live taping of a stand-up comedian for which Horizon users could virtually join the audience. And that's what I meant by the concerts being already kind of there.
Yeah.
Despite her enthusiasm for various aspects, she concluded that, apart from the smallish crop of current users, most of the rest of us won't be keen to spend hours and hours of our day in this V1 version of the metaverse. Her verdict is shared by other tech writers. According to James Vincent, writing for the tech blog The Verge, Horizon Worlds, quote, is so buggy and unpopular that Meta's own managers have been forced to shame employees into using it, end quote. Mm-hmm. He added that while he couldn't predict how scalable all the improvements will be, they would take years to implement.
Right.
Now for my view, finally, after all that explication. Ultimately, my answer to this question sounds a lot like our answers to earlier mansplaining questions about the AI behind drone technology or self-driving cars. I think one or more metaverses, or at least what the New York Times reporter Lauren Jackson described as, quote, a more immersive digital future, end quote, is inevitable. It's coming, and it's going to be big. Is it a technological white whale? I don't think so. Many of the purveyors of platforms and hardware are going to make back their investments and then some. Is the metaverse going to be the unrelentingly positive space envisioned by its evangelists? No frickin' way.
Yeah.
I already mentioned a bunch of actual and potential pitfalls like fraud, safety, and polarization. There are already interactive games and worlds that one can explore with that fancy software and hardware I referenced earlier. But the experience is, shall we say, not quite the utopia envisioned by Mark Zuckerberg.
Nope.
One app called VR Chat, in which you can create an avatar and visit strange worlds while communicating with other users online, is reportedly, quote, full of people hurling abuse at one another, end quote.
Yeah.
Isn't it obvious already that the metaverse is going to look just like the real world it emerged from, in all its beauty and depravity?
I think it's going to look like social media is what I think it's going to look like. I think it's going to have many of the same features. And a good number of those features is abuse and harassment, which, mind you, 99% of the people who use social media don't do anything like that. But because of the nature of the network, it just encourages that other 0.1% of people to engage in their absolute worst instincts.
Yeah, let's just hope that the metaverse isn't running algorithms on the side that are steering you to the most LCD content there, the way YouTube and Facebook do it right now.
Yeah.
Will the metaverse become central to the lives of billions of people? Will we all be dipping in and out of it multiple times per day? I sincerely doubt it, and I'm not alone in thinking that. Earlier this year, the Pew Research Center and Elon University's Imagining the Internet Center asked 624 technology experts for predictions about the trajectory and impact of the metaverse by 2040. 54% said they expect, quote, the metaverse will be a much more refined and truly fully immersive, well-functioning aspect of daily life for 500 million or more people globally, end quote. While 46% said, like me, that it will not. For experts, it's almost a coin flip. Regardless of its reach, who's going to frequent the metaverse? Lots of different people. But I have a hunch about who the frequent flyers will be. And for that, I'm going to end my remarks with a vivid memory. In the late 1970s, when I was a young teenager of 13, 14, 15 years old, I went to 3 Star Trek conventions in New York City. I lived in New Jersey at the time, and it was the first time my friends and I had ever traveled to and from the city without our parents, so it was tremendously exciting. But that's not why I'm telling you about it now. We got to roam free on several floors of a giant Midtown Manhattan hotel that served as the venue for the convention, where we saw the stars of the series in person and got many of their autographs. One day, we were goofing around in some quiet corner of the convention hall, and we came upon a young man dressed as Mr. Spock. He appeared to be in his early to mid-20s, about 6 feet tall, dressed from head to toe in the distinctive blue and black Starfleet science officer's uniform, with convincing Vulcan ears and holding a hand phaser. Now, this is before we had the word cosplay to describe this behavior. He pointed the phaser at us, pulled the trigger, and then said something like, "I've set it to stun, so you'll wake up in a few minutes." My friends and I were a little bit stunned, but not in the way he intended. We were about to laugh at him like, "Ha ha, very funny." But then he looked at us with daggers in his eyes and yelled, "Fall down." This big guy was yelling at us to play dead, or play stunned at least, and we didn't know whether he'd kick our asses if we failed to comply. So we complied. So here's why I just told you that story. Rightly or wrongly, and regardless of the best laid plans of its designers, my view is that the metaverse will be primarily occupied by people like that guy who was dressed as Mr. Spock.
Yeah.
People who feel like they either don't quite fit into the universe as it really is, or who yearn for a place where they can live freely as the avatars they always wanted to be.
Sure.
Gargoyles who are already predisposed to augment their realities with things like Botox or bourbon, tummy tucks or THC, nicotine or Nintendo, steroids or Star Trek. So, regarding your question of whether we'll ever be taping episodes of Mansplaining in the metaverse, my answer is no thanks. I'm going to live right here on terra firma, on the corner of actual and reality.
Okay, you've heard it here today, listeners. When Mansplaining goes virtual, you'll find me in the metaverse with my glistening pectoral muscles, but Joe will be setting it up. what occurs to me as you went through that last section is that people will gravitate to the environment in which they feel powerful. And so if you are a person who in life feels powerless, or you've experienced a sense of loss or a sense of injustice on a daily basis, then virtual worlds will seem very, very attractive to you, because that's a space in which you have a chance to be a leading member of the community, or the best player of the game, or something that validates you and makes you feel powerful. And I feel like there's this feature within online video games where part of the experience, if you play online multiplayer, is you have to go up against 14-year-old kids who have nothing else in their lives and spend their entire day practicing this game.
Yeah.
And they immediately crush you and then mock you for having lost. And it's not any fun, but for them, they're experiencing this power fantasy of just crush, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's probably something we're going to see in the metaverse, is that if there are environments that give people who lack power in the real space the opportunity to experience power, then they are going to flock to that like flies to manure.
Yeah.
And there's just going to be no stopping them. And they are going to live in that fantasy every moment that they can, because when they get out of it, they return to the experience of powerlessness that they find to be so intolerable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really well said. And I don't think it's at odds with what I said, though.
No.
I kind of use the metaphor of augmenting your reality. And you said they're seeking power, but there's people without. That's the common denominator. People lacking something, who want something, and they can find it in this imaginary place.
Yeah.
And they will find it there, and they will go there. You're quite right. But is it going to be all of us? Is it going to be even a critical mass of us? I'm not so sure. It'll be enough to make a lot of people a lot of money.
Right.
But I'm not going to be there. And I think a lot of other people like me are not going to be there either.
Really, my biggest question for Zuckerberg as he sets about this is the whole notion behind it, which is that in the book Snow Crash, the metaverse was an open source project. It was created by engineers in their spare time, and it was pretty much just a framework within which anyone, be you an individual or a corporation, could build something that people could come in and explore. And so it was not proprietary. It was not Windows only or Android only. It had none of those restrictions. And because it had no restrictions, like the internet, it had the opportunity to spread into every aspect of people's lives. Because one of the basic features of the internet is that you can use it with almost any device. You can be there on your laptop, on your computer. It doesn't matter if you're using Linux or Windows or Mac OS. You can be on there on your phone. Mm-hmm. You can even get on the internet on your refrigerator if you have the right sort of refrigerator.
Right.
So that's a certain way of building something, which leaves the door wide open to collaborators across the world, but it also makes it very difficult to govern or monetize that. And what Zuckerberg is trying to create is something where it's basically an all-encompassing Facebook. And so it's a scenario kind of like where today you might go into Facebook, like you pull your iPhone out of your pocket and you open the Facebook app and then you're in Facebook. In Zuckerberg's world, the metaverse is going to be like Facebook is all of that. Facebook isn't just an app. It isn't just your phone. It's the entire world. And I'm just not convinced that people want that, because the nice thing about Facebook being an app on your phone is that Reddit is also an app, and TikTok is also an app, and YouTube and Netflix are also apps. And so you're able to switch back and forth between these things. And you have that sort of freedom and choice, whereas with the metaverse, you're locked into whatever Zuckerberg has decided to provide you with, and that's probably not going to be enough unless it is so welcoming and all-inclusive that it's that non-proprietary environment that he is not trying to build. He's trying to build something that he will own 100%. And you're not going to have YouTube in there because Google isn't going to want to be part of it.
Yeah.
You're not going to have Netflix in there because Netflix isn't going to want to be part of it. And so it aspires to be the everything app, but people don't want an everything app. They want the apps that they like to use.
Yeah, I hear you. And I wouldn't put past Zuckerberg any dreams of godlike omniscience and being the everything, the all things for everybody platform. But that said, I mean, he's clearly aware of the interoperability snafu, you know? Like, you need whatever garbage you collect in his metaverse, you need to be able to take into another metaverse. And so I really think that what might end up happening is you're in Horizon Worlds, right? But maybe you're watching YouTube in Horizon Worlds, you know? If he's truly going to live by the words and make his deeds equal to his words, you would be able to use a Mac or watch YouTube in Horizon Worlds. And it remains to be seen whether that kind of interoperability is actually going to happen.
Yeah, it would depend on the sort of terms that he offers to companies. If he says to Google, sure, come on in, set up a YouTube environment, monetize it any way you want, just go nuts, then sure, yes, absolutely. And then you can go to Jeff Bezos and say, bring in Amazon, so there's all this commerce stuff, and you charge whatever you want, and you keep all the money, and no problem. And Bezos would be happy to do that. The problem is going to be if he goes to Bezos and says, sure, set up an Amazon shop within the metaverse, and we're going to keep 10% of everything you sell.
Yeah.
Or if it's like Apple, 30% of everything you sell. And Bezos is going to say no to that because he's already said no to Apple on the same terms in the iOS App Store. So it really depends on how much money Zuckerberg is willing to leave on the table in the name of getting everybody on board with his vision.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. And so the metaverse won't be the first or the last thing whose future depends on how the money men can hash out their differences, right?
Yeah. What I honestly think is that the metaverse is not going to be suddenly like a throw open the doors and here's the metaverse. My guess is that it will grow up from online video games because those are already, in some cases, VR environments that are available 24/7 that people are using and enjoying. And my guess is that some smart company will start linking one game to another so you can move laterally across these environments.
Yeah.
And so sort of kind of like a Minecraft environment being built block by block. My guess is that the metaverse will be built block by block from existing VR environments instead of a top-down, just suddenly open the door and here's the whole world for you sort of scenario.
Yeah.
But I've been wrong about many other things, so I could be wrong about that too.
Hey, it's a good guess. So do you think I did justice to your multifaceted question?
I think you did. Thank you. This is one of my favorite topics, so it's been a pleasure to talk about it.
Well, you ready for your question for next time?
I am so ready.
Okay. Well, this is not one of my favorite topics, but it's a topic that I think we need to talk about for this podcast. So remember at the beginning of this episode when we talked about the top 5 most popular websites in the world?
Uh-huh.
You probably won't be surprised to learn that there are 3 pornography websites in the top 14.
No, I'm not surprised.
One of the sad realities of our digital age is that pornography is accessible to almost everyone everywhere. I doubt there's a child in America who hasn't seen it, and millions of tweens and teens consume it every day. That's a far cry from when we were kids. I remember my friends and I would sneak glances at a physical copy of Playboy or Penthouse magazine whenever we had the opportunity, which wasn't often.
Yeah.
And yes, in the interest of full disclosure, mansplaining listeners, I've tried pornography, but I didn't inhale.
It's a choking hazard if you inhale pornography.
But let me get to my question. Decades ago, feminists and anti-porn activists documented how pornography warps people's perceptions of sex, consent, and even what normal men's and women's bodies look like. And now, Pornhub is just a click away on all our screens. My question is, what are the implications of the ubiquity of pornography in our society today?
Okay. That is not going to be a fun topic to research, but I'll do my best with it.
Good luck.
We went from my glistening pectoral muscles in VR directly to porn, and that's it for this week's episode.
Yep.
If you have comments, if you have your own prediction about the metaverse, if you think one of us is full of it, the best way to register your complaint or pay us a compliment is on our Facebook page, which you can find at Mansplaining the Podcast. If it's true that Facebook is circling the drain because of Zuckerberg's obsession with metaverse, maybe you want to get those comments in quickly before Facebook just ceases to exist. Come into the page, give us a like, post a comment to an episode. Joe will post his sources for this episode to that page. And you can even ask us a question, which maybe we will explore in a future episode. If you would like to do us a solid in other ways, one thing you can do is give us a rating and a review on your podcast platform of choice, be that Apple Music or Spotify or Google Play or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Give us the stars that you think that we deserve. Say some nice things about us in the comment. It does help other people discover Mansplaining.
If you want us to do a sex tape for the next episode of Mansplaining, put that in the comments.
If you want us not to do a sex tape for the next episode of Mansplaining, put that in the comments. All the comments, they're all good. We appreciate them all. We love them all. And we love you all, our listeners. So thank you for anything you can do to help spread the Mansplaining word. That's it for this week. That's been Joe, and I am Mark, and thank you for spending some time with us.
We'll see you next time.
That's it for this edition of Mansplaining. Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Thank you for hanging out with us for a little bit, and we'll see you next time.